A couple of weeks ago, I attended my husband's maternal grandmother's funeral in our small village in northwestern China. It was a week of preparations and funeral rites, ending with a burial. This week spent in the funeral home gave me a lot of time to reflect, and I also witnessed many unexpected and to me foreign scenes take place. And now I want to share some takeaways and some lessons and thoughts I had during this time, and they come in no particular order. Let's first talk about crying. And in Sweden, we also, of course, cry when someone passes away or at the funeral, when we miss them deeply or when we remember them fondly. And a lot of times we cry, but it is never scheduled. And that was something that was new to me. During the funeral process here, there was a lot of crying. And when they cried, they all cried together, and even at special time slots. To me, this was quite special to witness, and it also made me view crying a little bit differently. I actually quite like the idea that there are special times assigned for you to cry and to let all those feelings out. And if I take myself as an example, I usually don't cry a lot in front of other people, and usually not with other people either. So I think, for me, I think this just gave me a new idea of crying and how it can be very, releasing. When you're crying with other people and you hear them crying, that you can kind of let yourself go a bit more and really pour out all your emotions. And another way to do this is also the way they cry, which also differs from Sweden, because here they're kind of, when they're crying, they're often crying with words. So they're chanting or singing almost. Which I think adds maybe another level of just expressing your sadness. And I thought it was beautiful. It's very sad to listen to, but also very beautiful. Another thing I thought about was how present death is here. Grandma spent many weeks in the hospital. But when the hospital staff suspected that it was soon time for her to pass, they let the family know immediately. So here, if somebody dies at the hospital, you're not allowed to bring their body back home. So when the hospital staff suspects that someone is dying and only have a few days left, they will tell the family, and the family will immediately bring them back home. Being at home when you're dying and when you've passed away already is important for all the rituals, but then it's also dying at home is also a way to die with more comfort and respect. When someone is in their home dying, it is also more visible, more real and natural for everyone around that they witness death, something we will all go through at some point. My husband's grandmother passed away in one of her daughter's homes. And she was in that home for several days before she left the world, but also the week leading to her funeral. There are caskets here that you rent that look like a casket but works like a refrigerator. And that way you can keep the body at home while all the necessary rituals are performed. So death was there, always present through the body, a body that was still there but not alive. It's something we don't do in Sweden, and I think I would have found it quite strange a couple of years ago, but now I think it's a really good way to ease the process, like the grieving process, and to just let things take their time. And I think it's also a way to understand that the person is really gone. I remember when I was a child, when I was 6, and one of my grandfathers passed away, I didn't see him after he passed, and while we were at the funeral in the church, I kept thinking, like, what if he's alive in that coffin? I still remember that thought. And then when my second grandfather passed away, I got to see him after and to say goodbye to his body, and I remember, like, I understood that he was not there anymore. It's as if you hide death, then it makes it harder to accept and harder to let go, I think. Another example of how death is more present here is long before the time comes to go. In their 60s, people here prepare their coffins, their own coffins, and then they keep them in their home. I know Yonghong's grandmother kept it by her bed. She had a blanket over it, but she kept it by her bed. And I know I've seen other homes where they keep it in the living room, for example. So it's always present, and I think that gives another type of acceptance for that. I mean, we're all going to die eventually, and I think knowing that and accepting that can be really difficult. When the funeral process is this long, it gives you time to think, but also time to use your hands. So I don't think it's good for anyone to be stuck in their head for too long. Like, we need that body-mind connection. I think that's when we learn the best, that's when we function the best, and when we process the best. And there were so many little things that were done during the days in the funeral home. Clothes and headpieces were hand-stitched. Money was stamped and folded. There were calligraphy and decorations. Then the coffin was decorated outside and inside. We made wooden plugs to fasten the fabrics in the coffin. Money was burned. There was a lot of walking, of bowing down. The coffin was carried and the ground was dug up. So there were so many physical aspects of these rituals that I came to appreciate. It was, the final little gesture that you do to someone that you loved. Now this one is very simple. In Sweden, death is symbolized by black. In China, it's symbolized by white. But the funerals here, at least in this village, are very colorful. Colors are stuffed with underlying meanings and symbols here in China. And they use a lot of color even during the funeral rites and rituals. And I just found it really aesthetically pleasing, very beautiful, and made everything a little bit brighter. The days in between death and the burial, no one in the family cooked food. Yet nobody was hungry. Food was plenty because of community. Instead of family members having the stress of cooking for everyone, for the whole family and all the relatives, and also participating in the ceremonies and grieving, the neighbors came over. They came every day to cook and to clean the dishes. I find it really beautiful. Just the idea of having a community that you can kind of lean on, I think that's very comforting and calming. Now, if we want to hand paint the coffin, to make our own handmade clothes, handmade decorations, dig up the ground ourselves by hand, burn money night and day, cry together, eat together. If we want to wake next to the dying, if we want to wake next to the dead, if we want to respect death, the dying and the grieving, then we need time. In this modern world of ours, everything is made to be as efficient as possible, even death. So this modern efficient world is something that I am more critical towards after this experience. It made it so clear that modernization and efficiency has this tendency to remove our humanity and our connection to each other and to our natural world. This process and these rituals worked because we are in rural China. We are in a village in rural China. Because people, whole families, could take days and weeks off to grieve and to perform rituals and get together and cook. In the cities or in my home country, Sweden, this doesn't work. It doesn't fit the schedule. And so death is reduced to a funeral and crying on your own. During the time, both before and after the passing of Grandma, I thought a lot about death in general. There was one sentence that Yonghong said and then a text message from him that gave me a whole new way to look at death. And it reminded me so much of birth. The day before she passed away, we went to visit her and she was lying on her bed, and this time nobody was talking to her like when we visited before. And she was just lying there, and Yonghong didn't greet her when we got there, and I asked, should we not tell her that we're here? Should we not talk to her? And he said, no. He said, imagine if you're trying to fall asleep and someone comes to talk to you all the time. We should not disturb her when she's dying. And what he said was just so simple and so real. The next day I was at home with the kids, but he had been staying with her overnight, and he sent me a message that she was now throwing up and that she was in between two worlds. And again, this reminded me so much of birth. Birth and death, the beginning and the end of a life cycle, a whole that is now separating and becoming an individual, and an individual that's going back to being part of everything. They are transformative processes, they are delicate processes, and they should not be disturbed. And finally, the most unexpected scenes of this funeral was definitely the sketch with my father-in-law and another family member. They played an old couple with a baby that were mourning the passing of the husband's mother. So it was the ongoing scenario, but in a very playful way. The sketch was just lifting the spirits, making people smile and laugh and play, making fun of each other, and they made all these made-up dishes. They took soy sauce shots, and they tried to avoid the steamed paper buns and a watermelon coriander soup. So the way everybody had such a laugh together in a moment that was so very sad was unexpected, and it was beautiful and a lot of fun.